And with that, I'll turn it over to our guest speaker tonight. A lot of you folks know him. If you don't, his name is Scott Cornett. He's the Region 9 Fisheries Biologist out of the Allegheny office of the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. And he'll do his presentation on the state of the streams.
Thanks, Joe. My hero. So the only problem with these being recorded, I have to be careful what I say because, somebody that's not in the room could see that. All right, so we're going to go over a bunch of different things tonight. Some things that we did last year, mostly in conjunction with Trout Unlimited, and talk about some of our past successes, a little bit about what we're doing with stock trout streams, kind of a general overview on our trout streams, how they're doing, and talk about the future a little bit. So the first thing I want to talk about is a habitat project that was done on Wescoy Creek last year. Ate up a fair chunk of time of mine and a lot of other people's getting it planned and implemented. It's a pretty successful project. A little background on this project. The area it was in was downstream of Albro Road. Aerial photo in here of it. So that's Albro Road flowing downstream through there. This project, it was kind of the last intensively pastured section on Wescoy Creek. There's a few other small places, but this was kind of the last big one where you had cows running right through the creek and everything. And that was done right up through 2019. And then now the cows are out of there. So we started in 2020 to try to get this section fixed up, try to race ahead of the invasive species coming in and get some things growing on the banks, do some other projects, and this was part of it. So that pasturing over the last 100+ years, those cows had really beaten down the banks pretty good. So some of the things going on here were probably a result of long-term pasturing and banks not being stable. So this project was done to limit that bank erosion and also to try to do it in a way that would increase the amount of holding habitat for trout. It was about 375 feet, the project that we did, and it was located down in this lower part of the old pastured section down here. It's about 1,000 feet downstream of the road. So that's what it looked like beforehand. You had vertical banks that were eroding very quickly. Showing a couple more slides, just how fast it was going. And those soils, it's a state regulated wetland in there, and those soils, when they were eroding, they didn't slough in slowly. Big chunks fell off at a time and things like that. So, and it was kind of destabilized, so it was not doing very well. There's an example of that chunk falling in. You can see the tree tubes right here. We planted those trees in the fall of 2020 in there, and we did not plant those on the edge of the creek. We had 3 rows of them in there, and in some of the places there was only 1 row left. And this stuff, I think I took that picture last spring, that was all gone by the time we got into summer. So going pretty quickly. This is a 2010 satellite photo of that area, and approximately looking back through Google Earth, you can kind of go back with images. And this red line is where the stream bank was in 2020. And it continued to go even farther, and you see 200 feet down here. So 75 to 100 feet that stream moved in 10 years and had continued to move in the last 4 years. So that's much faster than normal rates of erosion. So we wanted to try to do a project to kind of take care of that. Before we started the project, we went in and we got estimates of the fish population, both within the site where we were going to do the project and upstream and downstream, where we could kind of see, and also set it up so we can monitor it down the road. So we went in and did electrofishing. We did this in mid-June because we weren't quite sure when the project was going to happen. It was based on when the contractor could be available. So we got in as soon as we could in June when the young trout were big enough to find. So even within the project site, because there is some deeper holes in there and there was a little bit of undercut bank before it would fall in, we actually had a decent number of trout in there, almost 600 fish per mile within that project. But we had about 40% more in the areas upstream and downstream of that. So we knew there's potential there to hold more trout if we can build some better habitat for them. So the project involved a lot of rock. Had some huge stones in there. Some of those are about the size of the car you came in today. So this is not stuff that a bunch of people with crowbars go out and do that project. It requires machinery. About 100 feet of the project, we installed lunker structures. I've talked about that at meetings before. If you're not familiar with those, it's a wooden crib type structure. We build them by hand. Once you get to know what you're doing, a crew can build one of these in like 20 minutes. So they go together really quick. And we built those in June, again, because we weren't sure when the project was going to happen. So we built about 100 feet of these. They're 8 feet at a time, 8-foot structures. And I'll show you a little bit more what these look like once they get into the water. Prior to actually doing the work, the project didn't end up happening until early October because that contractor was tied up till then, but he was ready to go. And we did move all the fish out of the work site because we were dewatering it. So we went in and did that first. And we used a bypass channel. So this is where the stream was flowing. We put it down through the old channel over here. So we say we work in the dry. It's not actually dry because you can't completely dry up an area with groundwater coming in, but it wasn't in flowing water. So we were sending a whole bunch of silt downstream when we were doing the work. We were very lucky in this project to have a really good contractor. We only ended up with 2 bids on this project. One was so high the project wouldn't have happened. And quite honestly, this guy, if he had not really liked to do these projects and essentially donated all of his time. So the amount of money we had to spend on this project pretty much was just materials that we could afford. The rest of the contractor time, he donated basically to us. And he did excellent work. He does this kind of work all over the state for Fish and Wildlife Service and other parts of DEC. He has his own stone quarry. So whatever rock we need, he goes and gets exactly the rock that we need, which is really helpful in a project like this. He's the same contractor that did the Pike Dam project removal in 2021. So we were very lucky to have him, or the project wouldn't have happened. So this is what the lunker structures look like once they've been put down in the water. They're rebarred down in. The front side over here is open with about 8 to 10 inch opening, and they're 30 inches back. So it's like a 30-inch undercut, about 8 to 10 inches high for fish to get back in to hide from predators and fishermen at times. So you've lined the front of it with large stone, and that takes the force of the flow during a flood. And then you start building the bank back behind it using medium-sized stone in here. We cut willow live stakes off these big black willows and lined the back of the bank in there for them to get growing. And then we restored the floodplain in there. Because this was a state-regulated wetland, we had to be really careful. We put this back together the way it was. And that added some interesting parts into the project, like using timber mats to get out there and that sort of thing. But that's what it looked like after we backfilled. The live stakes are back here. You'll see in some of these pictures orange in there. We painted them so you don't kill yourself when you're walking around in there. The grass grows up. You might be able to find them a little bit. Downstream of the lunker structures, we put in these large root wads. This is a 5-foot root wad that's taken out of the ground with about 15 feet of the tree trunk still attached. The tree trunk goes back into the bank to stabilize it, and then those root wads will be lots of cover for fish to get in and hide. It also helps to protect the bank a little bit from high flows. So we put 8 of those downstream of the lunkers. We put another dozen of them upstream of the lunkers, and they're held down with pinning them with one of those gigantic rocks, several of them, and that holds them in place. At the downstream end of the project, we use grade control. This is where a lot of the rock ended up getting buried in here. There are 2 reasons for doing that. The first one is to make sure that the elevation of that pool where the lunker structures are, even at summer low flow, it keeps enough water in there that those are going to stay underwater all the time. And the second thing it does, if the stream downstream becomes destabilized and downcuts the stream bed, it can only come to here and it stops it. So it doesn't continue up through your project and take it apart. And all those nooks and crannies in that rock are actually pretty good habitat too. So I expect to find, a fair number of fish living in all those rocks in the pool just downstream. So once the project's all done, this is a shot of what it looks like. That drone that you guys bought for Kyle to use, it's really cool because you get some much different perspective on your projects when you have that drone, and as well as the other things we're doing with it. But there's the lunker structures are in here, and this is the downstream end of the project. and going upstream. Another shot of it, looking upstream through there and the upper stuff in there. So the stream channel used to be over through here, and then it had cut way over here. So we didn't really change the alignment of it very much. We don't want to mess with grades too much if we don't have to, and pretty much just help to keep the stream bank about where it is now. We went back in mid-November to replace some of those trees that had been washed out before and add some more trees in there. So part of the funding for this, Western New York chapter applied to the State Council of TU and got a grant that covered buying some very nice nursery trees, tree tubes, as well as some of the seed. Because it was a wetland, we had to put wetland seed mix back in, and that stuff's pretty much more expensive than just regular old grass seed, and also paid for the wood for the lunker structures. So that was a big part of the project as well. So I think we planted about 80 trees in there through that stretch, and you can see these are good sized trees already up out of the tubes. They're past deer munching on them, but we leave the tubes on because the bucks would grub them and kill them if we didn't have the tubes on. So a couple before and after pictures of the project. This is looking upstream from where the lunkers were set before the project. That's what it looked like after. So we've added those root wads in there, and they're put in twos to give it a little more surface area on there. But those scour around there and have a nice place for the fish to be. Also, it helps to kick the flow back off of here, so it takes the stress off the stream bank. So those are working pretty good. There's looking downstream into where the lunkers are going to be, and what it looked like afterwards. So a little before and after. You see, we didn't mess with the alignment very much. Just bank protection and fish habitat. The major portion of this project was paid for through the habitat access stamp. Some of you probably, when you buy a fishing license, actually get asked whether you want to buy a habitat stamp. And that we do get funding for some of our projects from Habitat Access. That was $50,000 in there as a major portion of the project. Came from the Habitat Access stamp. So all of our projects usually involve a lot of partners, and in this one, the landowner, got to have the landowner on board because you're driving across his property to do this project. So they were into it. Yeah, the contractor was great. TU volunteers for putting lunkers together and moving fish, planting trees. Myself and our fisheries staff, Wyoming County Soil and Water Conservation District did a lot. They did a lot of the planning, helped me survey it, and as well as doing the hydro seeding and other plant seeding in there. And Fish and Wildlife Service staff helped us out a lot. Tom Hoffman and his group. So, like any of our projects, partners are always needed. And this project did get tested already. So back in early December, when we had a whole bunch of snow and then it decided to rain on it and melt off, this is actually the day after the water to the highest. It was about 8 or 10 inches higher the day before, and it was actually up on the floodplain. And once that force of the water gets up here, it just spreads out and slows down, and we didn't have any problem in there. And one of the problems with doing a project as late in the year as we didn't get a lot of chance to get grass to grow. You can see a little green, but must be had enough roots to help hold everything together. So got tested. There's looking back upstream. So it passed its first test, which is always good. Whenever you do a project and then you get that first high water, you're always like, oh, please don't fall apart. So this one worked out really well. Another project that was done this summer was done by Soil and Water Conservation District, and this was upstream of the old Pike Dam on the fairgrounds on Whisquay Creek. There was some money, again, because of the contractor. That project got done so far under budget that there's been quite a bit of money left over, and rather than have to give that grant money back, they were finding some other projects. So this was an eroded stretch of bank along here, about 100 feet. It tied into some old cribbing up here, and the dam is downstream. And so they put large stone in here, and again, got them to use some root wads. I think they put 5 or 6 root wads in there, provide fish habitat structures, as well as that rock left with lots of nooks and crannies. So a lot of places for fish to hide in there. So rather than just an eroded bank with absolutely no cover, that's a much improved site for trout to be in there. And the other thing, they had enough money left over as well from that one that they put some really nice trees in. There's a number of sites through the fairgrounds. The trees have been removed in the past, so there wasn't any shade. They were able to hire a contractor to come in with machinery and plant some of those trees with the big burlap root wads that are already 15 feet tall to really jumpstart things along. So they were able to plant, I think, probably about 40 really nice sized trees through the fairgrounds along the creek bank for that. Shift gears a little bit to some of the electrofishing that we did this year. When we got the state trout, the updated trout inland trout stream management plan done in 2021, we were kind of lucky to get that thing done because it was being held hostage by some influential folks in the Catskills that thought that having year-round trout fishing was going to end the world as we know it. It didn't happen. They didn't have it down there. So we had to agree to do a 3-year study to see whether the young of the year trout all disappear with year-round trout fishing, which I'll say we've had in Western New York for 25 years now. So the study was done to look for any potential impacts of that year-round, or the catch and release season, which is the season that used to be closed in the fall and winter. 3-year study. It was done statewide, probably about, I think, a dozen streams or so. It involved 2 things. We went out in the fall to count anglers, find out how many people are tromping around in the stream, and then went back and did late summer electrofishing to find out what the young of the year numbers looked like. So the idea was, if you let all these anglers come in, they're going to tromp all over the trout reds, and you're not going to have any young of the year in the summer. That was what they were worried about. So our sites out here in Region 9, we had 2 sites on the Wiscoy and 2 on the North Branch Wiscoy. These are sites, you don't necessarily get a lot of adult trout because they're more nursery sites, because that's what we're looking for, to look for young of the year. The results statewide, and this will be out probably on our website pretty soon once that report gets done. Very low use overall in the fall, which is exactly what we expected. I think the West Branch of the Delaware was the one that kind of had the most use out here. Very low use, which we knew, we expected, but it's there if you want to get out and use it. And basically no impacts to the young of the year reproduction, even in the West Branch Delaware, which was really the one they were so worried about. So essentially, it's not a problem, which we already knew here in Region 9, but the Catskills had to find out that as well. So that was a project we got done and found what we already knew, at least in this part of the state. Okay, going back to the habitat stuff a little bit, Joe alluded to it before about the Christmas tree project. This is something that Kyle came up with. And the idea here, this is on the upper part up near Bliss, where the stream is pretty small and lower gradient, not a lot of energy in here. But we had some eroded banks in there, not much growing on them. And we wanted to see, rather than come in and have to spend thousands of dollars on rock and stuff, can we do a project here that's just going to be pretty cheap, just some labor in there, collecting trees, and see if we can do it to protect that bank. So the way it looks, you put these Christmas trees in, you kind of shingle them together, tie them all together, and then stake the crap out of them and put them in the bottom. And I will say, pounding wooden stakes into the creek bed was not the easiest thing. Luckily, we had several 20-somethings out there to do that for that project. And there's another picture of it in there. So basically, the idea, when you got flood flows coming down through here, these kind of slow down the flow, take the energy off the bank. And the other thing they do, when you have a flood going on, there's a lot of fine materials being carried by the stream, and those fine materials will get dumped out in those trees and actually start to rebuild that stream bank and allow places for shrubs and things to root in there, and you can actually rebuild the bank. And this is a project we kind of wanted to say, hey, how's this going to work on our streams here? It was used extensively out in the upper Midwest in like sandy streams where you got a lot of bed load moving through. Pretty successfully there. So we want to see if this would kind of be a low cost, low energy or low effort project to do it. We wouldn't have done this down by Elbow Road. We put those in down there, they're gone. Too much energy, too much gradient. But up here, we're thinking it works. And Kyle, you said a couple weeks ago you were there and no damage and collecting sediment.
No damage. salmon and reds.
Yes, and Kyle saw a bunch of trout reds, so a lot of trout had spawned here. The other things these will do, we don't expect to see a lot of larger adult trout in there, but those should be good shelter for young trout to basically stay away from the big trout. So we're hoping a lot of trout spawned in this area, and those young of the year hopefully will use that. We went in and did some electrofishing before the project, so we know what was there. Go back this summer and see what's living in there now, and see if we do find more young of the year. So that one worked out pretty good. Another one we're working on with Kyle is a beaver pond study, and this Kyle's doing this statewide. About how many ponds are you evaluating?
Roughly 13.
Okay, so a little over a dozen different beaver ponds, and you're looking at a couple of different things there. Are the beaver ponds warming up the streams? That's basically in the literature, scientific literature, that's one of the things they seem to see are stream temperatures warming. But there's, I guess, also some reasons to think it may not do it. So we wanted to look at that, and we also wanted to see whether those beaver ponds are impacting the trout populations downstream. So Kyle had thermometers throughout the streams here. We did a couple. We did one on Wescoy Creek and one on a trim trout brook. Had thermometers in there to monitor it, and then we did some electrofishing. Well, I've showed this picture a few times over the years, this beaver. I don't know if it strikes anybody else as, if you remember Caddyshack and Bill Murray's nemesis in there, the varmint, that really looks like the varmint to me. Okay, yeah, it's not just me then.
Like this.
And I'm pretty sure that's a real picture. That's not like a puppet.
It's stuffed.
It's not stuffed, yeah. All right, so on Wescoy Creek, there's two big beaver ponds in the complex, one right below the other. This is the dam on the lower one. So, chest high or a 4 foot high dam in there. And that's backing up water for at least a couple 100 yards in there. We had an electrofishing site below that. And we were up with the drone doing some thermal imaging about 3 weeks ago with Kyle. And he got some shots of the dam overhead again. And it's really neat when you're doing this thermal stuff in the winter time. Besides just getting, the infrared images, you actually get to see what's going on from overhead. And you see in this beaver dam, it's a weird place for a dam because the creek comes down here and does this, and all he needed to do some places is put a dam here. This is basically where the dam is. He made a lot of work for himself. And you can see it's like leaking out all over the place in here. But that dam's been there for several years. And then the other dam that I showed before is just out of the picture, but it's backing water up into here. So this is our electrofishing site just above the upper beaver pond. And we did one below the beaver dam, right up to the dam. Essentially what we found this year was the trout population was pretty much the same above and below. Maybe a little bit higher below, but the habitat was actually a little bit better below. So, it certainly wasn't a dramatic thing of we're not seeing trout below the beaver dam. Again, this is kind of the first year of this. I think Kyle's planning to do this again next year. And so a multi-year thing. It's always good to do, more than 1 year to see what's going on. And also we didn't really see much of any difference in temperatures. The temperatures were just about the same above and below the dam. The one thing we did see is kind of a ponding effect, where the high temperature and Kyle, you want to explain that one a little bit better?
Yeah. So what we found was we call it a thermal lag. So if there's a very cold night, that beaver pond will actually hold that cold water to the next day, and even sometimes we found 2 days past when we had that cold night. So you see a shift in temperatures, but overall you're not really seeing a difference in average.
The maximum temperature above and below are essentially the same. Yeah. This is the beaver pond up on Trout Brook, just below Hillside Road. The dam itself is not active. It's still kind of there. It's still effectively ponding up the water in there. And that dam has come and gone over the years. What it is doing is collecting a lot of sediment right now, for sure. Here's a aerial image of it. Dam is actually just out of the bottom of the picture down here. Backs water up all the way up above the road here. This is kind of neat because this is a site where the main stream comes down the center and you've got two tributaries come together right there. And this is the section of Trout Brook that ironically has a lot of brook trout. I think because especially this trib here is cold, and the main stream goes underground above this for quite a ways, and where it pops back up out of the ground, it's very cold in there. And this branch historically has been a good trout stream, may not be quite as good anymore. Got more beaver in it too.
Scott, if you go back one slide there. So I just started looking at the thermal imagery for this site. And if you see between that far right tributary and that middle one, that little finger that comes in right there, that's the coldest spot in that creek.
Yep.
And then also that finger that's down in that lower part of the beaver pond.
There.
We found a pretty high volume spring.
Yeah, that's something really cool. The thermal imaging, you can really find those cold water spots, which is the idea of this. But it really shows up. But it's kind of neat in the wintertime because you get such a contrast between the white snow and the dark water that you can really see all those spots that you just can't see. This is all alder up in there. Unless you're looking down over it and the leaves are off, you can't see what's going on up in there. So
This isn't as shaded either.
what's that?
It's not as shaded.
No.
The other site was pretty.
Yeah.
Had a canopy.
Yep. Yeah, this one is wide open. We actually did a tree planting in here, probably, I don't know, 2017, 2018. And right after that, the beaver built a big dam and basically flooded everything out of there. We got like 3 trees left living in there. So I think that's on the agenda actually to do a little planting this spring in there and try to get some stuff going because yeah, it's wide open. So what we did see here, which really opposite of Wiskoy Creek, the site in the beaver dam there that we did was loaded with trout. We got a lot of trout. We got some big trout. I think that one was 18, 19 inches, just a beautiful brown. Downstream of the old dam, we got almost nothing. Very, very few trout. What both sites had in common was a lot of silt. And there was not great habitat, but certainly habitat that should have held fish downstream. So it was a pretty dramatic difference between above and below the beaver dam trout-wise there. Temperature-wise, again, not much difference. So temperature probably wasn't the issue here, but there's a lot of sediment. That dam's backing up a lot of sediment, a lot of it downstream of it. There's some big agriculture fields upstream of here that I think are definitely putting way too much sediment into the stream. And that's something we talked to Soil and Water Conservation District about, hopefully working with the farms a little bit to try to mitigate that, because that was disgusting. How much silt was in there? You're up to your knees in it. Yeah.
Scott, how far down on Troutful did you go when you went to Trout?
Was our site about 500 feet below the dam? So probably about our lower site started about 800 feet below the bridge, roughly. Yeah.
I think that was the one I was with you.
You were
But I didn't know if this was the same one, but
Yep.
I saw because I went way down.
Yep.
And I saw a significant number of trout.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it may get better as you go farther down away from this dam. Yeah. Yeah, that's something we may look at next year, maybe doing some additional sites and try to figure that out. Another electrofishing that we did in this gray cabin project done in 2022 on Wiskoy Creek. And again, we installed lunker structures in here during a bank stabilization. I was cutting into a cornfield in here, a big ag field. And so Soil and Water was going to do a bank stabilization project, and we said, let's enhance the habitat along with it. So we put lunker structures in here, went back and electrofished, and the finding basically overall we got almost 1,200 fish per mile, and that's about 2 times the population that was there in that site before the project. So it's another build it and they will come moment. They're definitely liking that habitat. And as you can see, we've got some larger fish in there. So that was the fish that they were doing right there. So about 21.5 inches this year. And ironically, we got that same fish in the lunkers last year. So really nice fish that seemed to like that as a house. Okay, also at this site, the old access road used to be like right here, and we were trying to build a little buffer area in there, get something growing between the creek and the roadway. And so Soil and Water Conservation District, working with the landowner, moved that roadway and improved the roadway so it wasn't a big mud hole. Back here, we were able to plant shade trees here, and we planted a bunch on the south bank in there on the floodplain as well. So that was Trout Unlimited volunteers doing that this past April. So hopefully we'll start getting some good shade trees growing up there and keep that buffer area between the cornfield and the creek. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some of our tree planting success stories, because one of the things, you know, certainly when we were doing a lot of this early on, I was thinking, oh, it's nice to plant these trees, but I'll be dead before they, you know, ever do anything. And I wanted to show a few slides because I'm still alive and they're starting to do stuff, which is kind of cool. So the first one to talk about on North Branch Wiscoy, we did a project in 2011. We put some lunker structures in and tried to make the stream a little more fishable. And we did a lot of tree planting. We planted like 1,300 trees, mostly in 2011, but then some in 2012 as well. And they were pretty nice trees that came from my nursery back then. In just 2 years, some of those trees were already 8, 10, 12 feet tall and bigger around than your thumb. So they really took off well. This is one of the sites where we put some lunker structures in 2011. We planted it in 2012, and that's what that looked like 10 years later. So we're already getting some pretty nice sized trees. They're starting to throw some shade. Another part of that project site, 2015, so that's 4 years after we planted. Those trees are already that size. In 2021, looking like that, busting out of the tree tubes. You can see it's almost totally shading the creek now on that west bank by 2023. So that worked out really. We created a nice shade, and those trees are also helping to hold the stream bank together. And you know, we got that in 11 years, so that's pretty neat to see that. Another site where things worked out really well, down at the fairgrounds on Wiscoy Creek, we did a bank project in 2006, and we planted it that spring. You can see all the puny little trees there. And I remember this one thinking, well, I'll never see this looking like anything. That's what it looked like in 2013 and 2021. We've grown a forest already. The same site, looking from the water angle, the habitat stuff in here with these tree revetments, fish get back under. This is one of our electrofishing sites, and it's got a lot of trout in it. But that's what it looked like the next year, with some willows starting to grow on the bank. 3 years later, we got the willows growing well and a few trees starting to stick up. By 2015, the forest is growing. 2018, really growing, and that's what it looked like this past fall. So 18 years later, we've got a really nice forest that's completely shading that side of the stream over there. So when we do these tree planting projects and you plant this puny little tree, just know that, you know, in your lifetime, it may really make a difference. And, you know, these are projects I picked out that were really successful. We had ones that didn't work out. We had one where we planted them before we were tubing everything, and we came back like 2 weeks later and the woodchucks had eaten everything we planted. So, but by and large, we've had a lot of success with it, and you know, it's worth doing. Okay, shift gears a little bit to talking about our stock trout program, and I've talked about this the last couple of years at the meeting. When our trout stream management plan came out in 2021, one of the things that particularly our Albany staff wanted to do was to make sure that we talked to landowners where we were putting stock trout, to make sure they were okay with the public being there to fish. The idea being, you guys, when you buy your license, are paying for those fish, and you should be able to go and fish there. Now, in the past, you know, if landowners had their property posted, we didn't stock it. But now, even if it's not posted, that wasn't good enough. We have to actually contact the landowner and say, are you okay with the public being here? So that project, that started in 2022. We worked in Erie County that year. In 2023, we did Chautauqua and Allegheny County. And this past year, we worked with 4 stock trout streams in Wyoming County, and we started on 3 of them in Cattaraugus County. As we found in the previous 2 years, the majority of the landowners either said no outright, or they didn't respond at all, which, in our way of doing things, is a no. So we did find enough to be able to keep a lot of stocking on these streams. So the majority was no, but we still managed to find enough yeses to still do a fair amount of stocking. And this other sign in here, any place that we are stocking now, you should be seeing those signs. So it's fishing permitted by courtesy of landowner. Now these are areas where we don't have public fishing rights already, or they're not, you know, a Erie County Park or something like that. As far as how this project from 2024, we had 7 streams, and we were contacting landowners, not all of them, just the landowners at bridges and access points, or places where a creek made right along the road or something like that. So we sent out, on those 7 streams, sent out 77 letters to landowners. We had 24 people interested. Now, some of those interested people really just wanted to talk to me and complain about fishermen and tell me they didn't want them there. But we did end up getting 17 people gave permission and said, yes, fine. And a lot of people were like, yeah, fine, no problem, you know. But 18 people also said, no, thank you. And then 35 didn't respond, which becomes a no. So that's why I said the majority of people kind of fell into the no category. So we did have to remove stocking from 2 streams, Buffalo Creek in Wyoming County, we took off, and also Wrights Creek down in Cattaraugus County. How many people know where Wrights Creek is? A few, okay. Not very many. Didn't probably get fished very much anyway. But that and Buffalo Creek, we only had 2 stocking sites on those anyway, and those people said no with those sites or didn't respond. Buffalo Creek, we used to stock like 6 miles of it, but over the years there's been more and more posting. So we were down to only 2 stocking points anyway. So, you know, those were the 2 that we lost. Overall, we lost 31 miles of stream for stocking, but we're allowed to still, if we have a property owner at a bridge that says yes, we can call that a roadside access site. Those actually get a fair number of fish. It might be 150 fish at that one bridge for that one property. So because of that, we didn't lose as many fish as I would have guessed with that many miles. It's only about 715 total fish less going in those streams. So we got 1 more year of this. We're doing it for the rest of the Cattaraugus County streams, and then Region 9 will be done. And this isn't just here, this is going on statewide, so all the DEC regions are doing this. I guess when that's all concluded, they'll actually add everything up and tell you how many less miles are stocking. All the information on where we're still stocking, if you go on our DEC info locator map and click on trout streams, you're going to see which sections are still stocked on all the streams. So that's pretty up to date. So that kind of brings me to the general state of the streams. This is kind of a high elevation overall. There's variation between some of these streams, but just kind of a general, how are the trout streams doing? And start out talking about brook trout. I've mentioned here at the meeting before, we've got hundreds of streams around the region that have brook trout in there, wild brook trout. Many of them you can step across. They're tiny. They're left in the very headwaters, the tiniest, coldest tributaries. Unfortunately, the vast majority of these are on private land. So, you know, you may have to ask permission to go in there. They're not going to show up on our info locator because they're on private land. Contact me. I can tell you where those are, but you're not going to see them on our maps. So those populations, because of the habitat they're living in, very small streams that can all but dry up in a summer like last year in a drought, those populations are very dynamic. If you get good reproduction and you have a good wet summer, you may see those brook trout populations go way up. If you have a couple of drought years like we just had, you may see them go down. And we have seen some of that recently. Our office hasn't been able to get out doing much brook trout work, but the Allegheny State Park has taken up some sampling over there and been working with them to get brook trout monitoring in the state park streams, which is the largest conglomeration of brook trout streams that are publicly accessible in western New York. And what they have found, comparing it to our past data, is those populations are down substantially. But, we've had some pretty bad years for brook trout survival. Brown trout populations overall, we kind of saw, going back historically, in the 1970s and 80s, our wild brown trout populations were, by and large, pretty low. And what we started seeing through the 1980s into through the 1990s is this just big increase on a lot of our wild brown trout streams. So some of it coincided with our not stocking them anymore, but I think a lot of it coincided with the cows getting out of the creeks, the farms on a lot of these streams where you used to have cows running all over the stream. Now the cows spend their lives in a barn. Now that can have some issues too, but I think overall now you don't have the banks being beaten down. You had the trees growing up, started shading it. The streams are colder, so we saw some big improvements. Also, what was happening kind of in the 80s and 90s is from the standpoint of trout anglers. Were they eating all the trout they caught?
Yeah, pretty well.
Well, maybe in the 70s, but as you got into the 80s and 90s, catch and release pretty much just became what people did. So that probably accounted for some of the improvements in the wild trout populations as well. So we saw those populations explode through the 90s into the early mid 2000s, and then we started seeing some declines. Not on all the streams, but some of them declined. And then in the 2020s, they've kind of just flattened off. So, which is good to see. You don't want to see it keep doing that. Our rainbow trout, I'll get to some of the reasoning behind this in a minute. Our rainbow trout populations, which also had really exploded in the 80s and 90s, in the early 2000s, they kind of peaked and they've been going down, and that's kind of across the board on most of our wild rainbow streams. Their numbers are about as low as they've been since probably in the 80s. And that's on most of our wild rainbow streams. So probably a number of reasons. I doubt it's any one thing, and many of these things we just don't have a really good handle on to know which ones are the most important factors or the factors. We don't have enough water temperature monitoring long term to be able to say streams are likely warming up, but we know water temperature tends to follow air temperature, and we know air temperature is getting warmer. So it's pretty likely that most of those streams are also warming. And a lot of our best streams, if you go into the Wescoy Creek, you're going to see 75-degree water temperatures in a lot of these places, which is becoming really stressful for trout. Well, most of these do cool off overnight and recover. But if streams continue to keep warming and the temperature starts to get to 80, then we may start seeing bigger effects. So there may be some of that going on. We know droughts and floods are more frequent. Droughts, obviously, especially on those little brook trout streams, they're terrible for them. The adult populations, predators have a field day. So when you get those drought years, that's bad for adult trout populations. And when you get those big flood events like we had back in the beginning of December, where you get all that snow and you get a lot of rain on it, it washes off. In the winter and spring, you can lose trout reproduction, washing out the eggs, or the young fry when they first hatch out are really vulnerable during floods. So you can lose trout that way. So we may have had some reproduction failures, especially for rainbow trout. They spawn in the late winter through the spring, and that's the time we seem to have been having those late winter big flood events more often. We certainly, and I've talked about this before, we got a lot more fish predators out there. And environmentally, it's a good thing. We don't have things like eagles and ospreys, populations going to extinction because of DDT, but we have eagle and osprey populations that are much higher. Same thing with great blue herons. We've reintroduced river otters here in western New York, and mergansers are much more abundant than they used to be. So there's a lot more things out there to eat fish now besides just fishermen, and fishermen aren't eating them much anyway. And some of our streams the habitat has gone downhill, sometimes because of floods, sometimes because of land use issues. And agricultural pollution. There's a lot of big farms out there, and there's potential problems. Problems we know about and other problems we don't know about. So there's all kinds of reasons that may kind of lead into all of that. And again, this is kind of the general overview, so it's not all bad, but it's, you know, it's kind of, to me, it's kind of a warning thing that we seem to have seen that peak to our trout populations, and they declined in a lot of cases, but the good news kind of seemed to be leveling off. But, you know, we need to keep a handle on those things. And as well as any of these factors may be limiting factors that we can. Obviously, floods, droughts, can't do much, anybody sitting in this room right now, about those. So, kind of leads me to where it looks like trout management and that sort of thing is going here in Region 9. And it's very likely we're not going to be going back to the days where we did a lot of fish sampling. If you look at the period from 2016 to 2020, we had standardized electrofishing sites on, I don't know, 10, 12 of our streams around the region that we were doing every year to monitor those populations. The days of having people to do that and time to do that is pretty well done. We obviously were able to do that because of volunteer efforts, but you know, even with that, we just don't have the opportunity to do that as much. And from what our direction is, pretty much from Albany, when we do stream work, most of the time they want us to be doing monitoring on our wild quality or wild premier streams. So the days of being able to go out and look at those little brook trout streams that not many people are fishing is probably going to be pretty limited. They really want us to key in on our major heavily used waters. Hopefully we'll be able to continue to work with our partners on doing habitat enhancement projects. You know, sometimes it's a little overwhelming because you fix 300 feet of a 20-mile long stream, but every one of those 300 feet does add up. And I'd like to see, you know, the scope of these projects getting bigger, but they're, of course, limited by money. Now, some of the things like, you know, Kyle is trying with the Christmas trees, we may be able to do more areas with limited funding, but hopefully we'll continue to be able to do more of that, and DC will be a part of that. We're important in that, but we're not critical. You folks, TU can do a lot, Soil and Water Conservation District. And what's really nice in the last 10 to 12 years of my career here, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been great to work with. We didn't used to even talk to them unless get any help from them. And now they come for a lot of our projects. They are the bank. They are able to bring in grant money and get it spent, and it really allowed us to do a lot of the work. So all those partners are still out there. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing our stock trout streams in Cattaraugus County this year. So I expect that we're probably going to be stocking some less trout in Cattaraugus County in the future because of losing access. And that may still happen on the other trout streams. You know, when the posted signs go up or landowners are unhappy with fishermen, you know, there goes the stocking at least at that bridge. And if it gets, you know, like we've gotten to on some of these streams, there's not any place to put the fish anymore, so we quit stocking them. So I can see further reductions in stocking in the future because of loss of access. We can still grow those fish, we still put them out there, and people still want them, not in the numbers that they used to come out fishing for them, but we can do that, but we can't do that if there's not public access. And that's kind of where it brings to that advocacy from Trout Unlimited is very important. So the way things work at DEC, a lot of times is, you know, user groups, when they contact our Albany staff or our regional staff or our regional fish managers, and say, we want you to go out and do this work, we want to know what's going on, that's where it makes it easier for us to do that work. That advocacy, as well as, you know, staffing, making sure that there's still people working to be able to do that work. So advocacy from TU is going to be, it's important now, and it's going to continue to be important. and probably more in the future. So that kind of brings me to me, and I've alluded to this in the past a little bit jokingly, but that 25-year-old kid with dark beard and maybe a few less pounds basically got to have his dream job playing with fish, and 35 years later turned into that. So, for me, it's bittersweet. I'm planning to probably retire towards the end of April. And I say signing off mostly because I'm also hoping to be able to continue to work as a seasonal fisheries technician a couple days a week to be doing habitat and access work. So that's kind of the plan right now, and it really has been an honor and a privilege to be able to work for you. But basically, that's what DEC fisheries staff. I never considered that I work for the governor or a commissioner. I work for the anglers. That's essentially, you guys do pay our salary. That's where it comes from. So I appreciate, and I've said, some of my very best friends are from this group, and this has been, the best part of my job is working with all of you. So I appreciate that, and it's, people are always like, "Are you nervous when you come up to these meetings?" It's like, no, I'm just going to talk to my friends. It's cool. So, with that, I guess I'd say questions that you got on anything we covered here, or anything trout-wise, anything that won't get me in trouble if I actually honestly answer. Yeah.
Who's going to be the new Scott Cornett?
That's a good question. We've been told not to expect any backfill for my item in the near future.
Really?
And that's just the way things work. Fish and wildlife in DEC are not top priority for filling jobs. We haven't been forever, and it's certainly not going that way right now. So I don't know. Good question.
Those root bars that you caught, don't they have a short lifespan from right away?
So the root wads, yeah, they're wood, so they're going to rot. One of the things you try to do is to keep them submerged as much as possible. And even in those projects, contractors always like to get them a little too far out of the water. But they will rot, so they're not designed to be there forever. The lunker structures, they're totally submerged. They're made out of hemlock, and they're going to be there for 100 years before those rot away. Those root wads, based on what I saw, you saw in the one that it showed for the trees there at the fairgrounds, that was put in 2006, and those were cottonwood trees, so those aren't really like a long-lasting tree. Those are still pretty good there 18 years later.
I would guess less than 5.
Yeah, no, those root wads, I would guess they're going to still be functional for 15, 20 years. By that point, hopefully we got some nice trees growing up behind it. That'll eventually die, fall in, become large wood. So, yeah, it'll last forever, but probably don't really want to use plastic root wads if that's tacky. Yeah.
When you got this new program where you have to ask permission for the sites to stock for the public access, I noticed when we have gone down and helped stock on the Cohocton, the TU group down there it just seems like all the guys are there at the stockings, and that's not unusual to what we have here, but they just know all the landowners, and is there any programs around the state where TU's helping to go ahead and go ahead to the landowners and say, hey, you're going to get this letter, or you got this letter?
Yeah.
Could you answer it and say yes?
So that has happened in some parts of the state. So one of the things that our bureau chief has tried to do last year, because obviously we get people that just aren't even talking to us, and for a number of those sportsmen's groups that help the stock, could be TU or other sportsmen's groups, they do know the landowners better. So we actually have been trying to find contacts with those groups that would then contact the landowners. We have had some people from Chautauqua, Allegheny, in Erie County say they're going to do that. Hasn't worked out real well. I think in a few of the regions they've gotten some people signed on that way. But one of the things, we're not, we're not going out and knocking on doors. Honestly, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that a lot of places. Anymore, you really don't know what's going to happen if you go knock on a door. So I don't blame the sportsmen for not really wanting to do that either. But yeah, I mean, we definitely thought of that and tried in a few situations, but we haven't gotten a lot of people to step forward and do it. Yeah.
Are there any reasons people are giving for, I know some people are not wanting people to,
It runs the gambit. A lot of times we don't know. They just send a card back and say, no, thank you. But some of the people I've talked to, liability is one of the things, even though they're covered under the general obligations law. Sometimes it's like, no, I live there, so I have this to myself and nobody. And a lot of it is they've had bad encounters with an angler. It probably only takes one really bad encounter for people to say, nope, don't want to do that. So, those are some of the reasons you get. But most of the time, we don't even know because we can't contact them. There's been a couple of times when I have gone and knocked on a door on a particularly, important spot, like on Lower Cattaraugus Creek, when I say lower below Arcade, right at Hake Road, which is a really popular fishing site. And we had a landowner right there at the bridge, and I went to their house several times. I left them notes saying, please call me. Nothing.
He said cows killed.
What's that?
Somebody killed his cow.
Well, that would probably discourage them from wanting the public there. Yeah.
That's probably why.
Okay. Yeah.
Scott, just you're painting kind of a dark picture about getting access if you knock on a door.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the work that I do, I have to do that a lot.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of the time,
Yeah.
I get permission.
Yeah.
Some people have been very encouraging. I even got permission from one woman who had called the state police on me twice. And
Can you blame her, John?
no, but
That wasn't for fishing.
that was well, it was for trespass. But I've had people. I've approached numerous people with posted signs on their property.
Yeah.
And if I see them out like cutting the lawn or something like that, even if I don't need permission to get onto the stream, I've gotten what I need for that stream.
Yeah.
I have talked to them and they have given me permission. Even if at first they say no, fishermen leave all kinds of garbage. If you offer to clean up garbage and you bring a garbage bag with you, that helps a lot.
Yeah. Now, definitely, angler, there's certainly a decent chance that you're going to get on the property.
Yeah.
And the advantage an angler has usually is they're not showing up in a state truck saying, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
A lot of the rural areas around here, that doesn't go over real big.
I just didn't want to paint too dark of a picture of getting access for people because
Right.
it is worth trying.
Yeah, and from a standpoint, and a lot of people, if you knock on the door and ask, they're going to say yes, but they want to know who's there.
Yeah.
So they can't, they don't want to just open it up to whoever wants to come here. And so, yeah, you can get access, but that, with the program we're doing, it has to be everybody can go whenever they want. And that's the problem. People don't want to necessarily give up that ability. And the same reason we can't buy fishing rights is they're okay with people fishing there, but they don't want to give up that right forever. They still want to say, no, you were an idiot, I don't want you here. As well letting everybody else. Yeah.
Do you guys ever check up on 362 just about the list with spawning up through there? I remember as a kid, and it would be all open through the gravel, so all up there.
Yeah, if there's good spawning gravel, they'll find it. I mean, we're usually not out there in November when they are spawning.
Right.
Kyle walks all these creeks, 12 months a year, and Kyle says they're there.
Beaver, are they down on Perry's?
Yes.
Beaver everywhere. Yeah.
Uh,
You have a question there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Bugs.
Yeah.
So, trout population great. The structure is great.
Mhm.
How are you approaching bug life and some of those things that are really important to the trout and how they're living? Because
Right.
I think there's been lots of complaints about bug life.
Yep.
And bugs are not doing good right now.
Yeah, and
So-
that's something I've heard for most of my career The problem from the standpoint of how, are the hatches as good as they used to be? We could go in and we can do, kind of what Kyle has started to do and collect some insects, and you can figure out there's this many per square foot. But we didn't do that in the past. So we can say this is what it is now. And it's okay, because now you can monitor from this point on. But when people say the hatch isn't what it used to be, I don't know what it used to be in a quantitative sense. Now, qualitative, as far as what insects are there, what species, we do that. Our Division of Water does rotating interbasin surveys. Every 3 years, they go to larger watersheds. They have standardized sites, they have random sites, and then if we think there's a problem area, they'll go out there and they see what species of invertebrates are living there. And if it's lots of stoneflies and mayflies, it indicates good water quality. If it's nothing but aquatic worms, you know you've got problems. So we are doing the quantitative stuff of, for water quality, but the qualitative stuff of actually measuring densities of insects, we've never done. That's just not part of our program. It's pretty difficult to do on a long-term basis, on a widespread basis, and you're always going to have variation. We have variation with the fish, but you'd have even more with the insects.
Is there bookends on the variations that we should be paying attention to? AKA like low levels, high levels, and how we can start paying attention to those things, and stream improvements, and trout water or biomarkers we should pay attention to direct resources to those things.
Yeah, there are. I mean, one of the things that, again, the qualitative part is one of the things that we look at, because if you've got impaired waters, it's much easier to get grants for doing improvement, particularly could be on farm operations or something that might be impacting it. So if we know there's impairments, now it's easier to get grants. Not necessarily in water habitat stuff. I'm not sure the habitat is necessarily the issue for insects. It could be in a situation like Trout Brook and that beaver pond, where you're not going to get a lot of clinging mayflies and silt this deep. They're not going to be there. But overall, the cobble gravel substrate is still what it's always been. But if you've got lots of pesticides running off that's affecting them, that's not a habitat issue, that's a land use issue.
My understanding is there's been pesticides studies. We thought there was lots of them, but there hasn't been recently. So, I mean, it might have something to do with habitat or groundwater or general extreme low temperature.
Well, temperature can certainly affect your species if it's too far out of that range. Yeah, I guess to answer your question, no, we haven't done much of that. Again, it's just having the time and ability. What are we going to put our resources into? And you're not going to support the trout populations that we do without having a fairly abundant resource of food for them, and that starts with the insects. So that in itself tells us there's a fair amount there. But some of that reduction in population we've seen could certainly be a result of reduced food resources. One of the things we certainly have seen, and I should have mentioned this as well, we used to, when we would do our sampling on Wiskoy Creek, we might handle 1,200 fish. And if we get a 16-inch fish in the survey, a 16-inch fish, that was impressive. In an 18, we were like, woohoo! Now we don't do a survey site that doesn't have at least one 18-inch fish. But the numbers are lower, but we get more big fish. And that may simply be an issue of less competition for the amount of food that's there. As well as people putting back wild fish. Yep. So we can
I
talk about
understand that it's not a great sign for future fisheries, though. Big fish without little fish.
Well, it's not that there's not little fish there. It's that the balance is a little bit more. Instead of all of them being this size, you get a more stretched out population. Yeah, which, again, depending if you want to catch lots of smaller fish, not as good. If you're into catching a few bigger fish, it is.
there's a couple of questions.
Yeah, let me get some back there. Yep.
Oh, I just had a question. Where you doing these, stream side stabilizations, roof balls, or Christmas trees? Is there any ongoing control on invasives coming into that new silt and?
So there
structure
is a
and
little
frenzy?
bit. So Japanese knotweed, which is, spreading on all our streams. Soil and Water Conservation District in Wyoming County does have grants, and they are going out and trying to do controls in the spots they are. They're cutting, they're herbiciding to try to control those. They're not going to eradicate them, but try to control it long enough that we can get in there and get something else growing. But there's other species like mugwort, which how many people know what mugwort is? Not many. Well, when you go out to most of our trout streams right now, it's everywhere. That site there at Elbro Road, they stopped pasturing in 2019. By the time we planted in 2020, we already had patches going, and now there's very extensive patches going. So it's like a race of getting those trees to shade the creek before the invasives get going. So there's not a lot going on. There is a little bit, but we've already been living with honeysuckle and multiflora rose on our streams for years now. And I think the reality is most of our streams are going to have a lot of invasive plant species out. We do our best to try to keep them out and get other things growing in place of them, but that's a tough thing right now.
What's the management strategy for Quaker Run in Allegheny State Park?
What about
Quaker Run in Allegheny State Park? The management strategy?
So that one is one of our stock trout streams. It's in the state park, so that's one that's got the public access. We didn't need to worry that part. It's stocked once each spring with yearling and 2-year-old brown trout. And there is a stretch that the park has a regulation. It's not DEC's regulation. That is a delayed harvest stretch in there, down in the lower part of the creek. Yeah, so that's a special park regulation, not ours. So, but the management there is to be stocking in there. There are some wild brown trout too, but it's one of our stock trout streams, pretty popular one being in the park.
Yeah. Up in Weathersfield, Marquardt cleared up a bunch of land up there.
On East Quay Creek?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were they able to do it to slow him down up there?
What he did was mostly legal until he got to the regulated wetland. And then they got spanked for that. They did do a little bit of stuff in the creek itself, which was not legal.
Yeah.
But as far as removing all the vegetation on the bank, that's legal. So, yeah. And unfortunately, they now know they can do that on any of their properties.
Well, yeah, they're all over there by Hillside too.
Yeah. Well, hopefully some of that stuff at Hillside Road isn't stuff that they're going to be actively using in wetland. Hopefully. Any other questions? Yes.
I seen the thing for a couple weeks ago. Was gonna be $1 million for the Springville Dam to Longridge.
They keep me out of the loop on that one. They kind of know how I feel
What
about
about the
that.
elevators? Is that really gonna happen?
I don't know, honestly. Jim Markham is our fish manager now for Region 9. He was doing the Lake Erie stuff. Jim's the one that's involved in that, so I'm not sure what's going on with it. The stuff in the paper, maybe there actually is something going on. But, yeah. Yeah, don't hold your breath is probably a good one.
Zach from Fish and Wildlife a couple weeks ago said that it was going through again now.
Okay.
The elevator?
Yeah, well, don't hold your breath.
Passage, I think it was like that.
That elevator was a
Yeah.
weird.
20 years that's been going on.
Yeah.
Anything else, folks?
Real quick, on the East Coast where you stock those more wild small trout,
Yep.
I got the impression it was a failure. Is there any update on that?
No, that actually worked out pretty well.
I heard you didn't-
So what he's referring to, prior to the last few years, we were stocking just a straight domestic strain of brown trout, which is the same strain we've been using for the last 30 plus years. Very inbred, doesn't live very well once we put it in the stream. So we were trying to figure out if we could cross the domestic strain with a wild strain and basically get a smarter fish. And we did that, and then we did some evaluations for a few years. East Coy Creek was one of the streams to see whether they would survive. And we did find that they survived about twice as well as the domestics. So we are in the process of switching. They are a brood stock now, are those hybrid fish. So now, it's not like there was a bazillion more of them, but they did survive at about twice the rate of the straight domestics. So, and that was the goal of the project. So they decided that we would use those as our new brood stock.
Twice as much might be 10 compared to 5.
Yeah.
It's not a big number.
It's not huge. It's not dramatic. It's not earth-shattering, but it's twice as good as what. I mean, there's still, for one thing, we put them in some water it's kind of marginal for any of the fish to make it. But they're better at avoiding predators, but apparently not really good at avoiding predators. Yeah. So it's an improvement. It's not earth-shattering, but we decided to use those as our brood stocks. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
One last thing before everyone takes off. I just want to thank Scott personally and for the chapter for all the work he's done for us over the last 30 years.